After dark, a suffocating stillness blankets New Brighton. A quiet so heavy, it feels like it's pressing the air from your lungs. Once alive with the clamor of steel mills and shipyards, the city is now little more than a hollow shell. Boarded up factories, shattered windows, and streets crumbling under decades of neglect. It's the kind of place where dreams go to die, dragging down anyone foolish enough to linger. At 18, I was broke and desperate. College wasn't an option, unless you counted community college, and even that seemed out of reach with no way to pay for it. So when I spotted a help wanted sign taped to the grime-coated window of the Midnight Arcade, it felt like a lifeline, or at least a temporary way out. The arcade squatted at the corner of Broad and Elm, wedged between a shuttered laundromat and a liquor store that looked like it hadn't passed inspection since the 80s. A flickering neon open sign buzzed faintly, its dull glow struggling to penetrate the nicotine-stained glass. It must have been a local hotspot back in the heyday of Pac-Man and Galaga, but now it was just another relic. The ceiling tiles drooped, stained amber from years of smoke, and the carpet was a patchwork of spills and bare spots worn down to the concrete. The air was thick with the staleness of old popcorn, fryer grease, and a faint trace of mildew. It wasn't glamorous, but it was a paycheck. The manager, a guy named Dave, was waiting for me inside. He looked as worn out as the arcade itself, with a permanent 5 o'clock shadow and a nervous twitch in his left eye. His clothes were a mismatched assortment of old jeans and a faded flannel shirt, the kind of outfit that suggested he had long since stopped caring. "You Jake?" he asked, his voice gravelly, like someone who'd spent a lifetime chain smoking. "Yeah," I said, forcing confidence into my voice, though the knot of doubt in my stomach was tightening. The weight of what I was stepping into began to creep in, but I shoved it aside, clinging to the thought of a steady paycheck. "You start tonight. Simple job. I don't care if you play the games, sit around, whatever. Just follow the rules." He shoved a clipboard into my hands, the paper clip to it faded and worn from too much handling and too little care. "Read it. Memorize it. Most of it's just common sense." I glanced at the list, my brow furrowing. 7 rules scrawled in uneven, blocky handwriting, like they'd been hastily copied and recopied countless times. Turn off the jukebox by 11:30 p.m., no matter what song is playing. Do not let it restart. If a game screen glitches and shows a figure standing still, avoid walking past it. Find another route. Never touch the claw machine after midnight. If the claw moves on its own, leave the area immediately. If you see the silhouette of a man standing near the exit, do not approach him. He doesn't like to be seen. If the bathroom door opens on its own, lock it. Do not look inside. Do not wait to hear it close. At 2:22 a.m., hide. Wherever you are, stay silent and out of sight until the clock strikes 2:23. If you hear a child laughing, find and stand beneath the nearest neon light. Do not move until the laughter stops. "You don't need to understand these," Dave said, his expression unreadable, his eyes darting towards the machines as if to make sure none were misbehaving. "You just need to follow them, most of them." That last part stuck with me. "Most of them?" I repeated, confused and trying to parse his words. "Why not all of them? What made some of the rules optional?" Before I could press for more details, Dave shook his head. He stared at me, his eyes hollow, the kind that spoke of someone who'd seen too much and carried none of it lightly. He didn't bother explaining, didn't even try. His hand landed on my shoulder, firm but cold, like a bad joke with a punchline I hadn't gotten yet. Then he turned and walked away, leaving me alone in the dim, dying glow of the arcade. I should have left right then, The place reeked of something wrong, a time long gone that refused to let go. But I stayed. New Brighton doesn't give you many chances, and sometimes you take what you're given, even if it feels like a deal you'll regret. The arcade wasn't exactly bustling with customers. By 10 p.m., the place was practically empty, save for a couple of regulars who looked like they'd been here since the Reagan era. One guy was hunched over a pinball machine, muttering under his breath as the ball clinked and clattered through the bumpers. He had a look about him that suggested this was his only escape from whatever life he was trying to forget. Another was glued to a Street Fighter II cabinet, his fingers twitching as though the game might somehow connect him back to a time when life had more meaning, his face frozen in a nostalgic grimace. I took my time walking the floor, familiarizing myself with the machines. Most of them were old classics: Pac-Man, Donkey Kong, Space Invaders. But there were a few oddities, games I'd never seen before. One was a black cabinet with no title or instructions, just a joystick and a single red button. Another had a screen that flickered like static, as if it was barely holding on to its sanity. I touched the screen lightly, and it buzzed under my fingertips, a jolt that sent shivers up my spine. By 11:15, I was sitting behind the counter, flipping through my phone to kill time. The jukebox in the corner was playing some old rock ballad, the kind of thing you'd hear on a late-night infomercial. The rules said to turn it off by 11:30, but for now, I let it play. It wasn't hurting anyone, and I figured a little music might keep the eeriness of the empty arcade at bay. At 11:29, I made my way to the jukebox. Its lights blinked lazily in time with the music, smearing faded colors across the grimy carpet. My hand hovered over the switch on the back, fingers hesitating for just a second before I flicked it off. The music cut out instantly, leaving the room draped in a silence so thick it felt alive, coiled and waiting. I took a step back, scanning the room. Nothing. Just the quiet pressing down, the air heavier than before. Probably just nerves, I told myself, though it didn't feel like it. All right, I muttered under my breath. Simple enough. For the first couple of hours, nothing happened. I stuck to routine, restocking the snack bar, keeping my head down. But right around midnight, the quiet shifted. I was stacking bags of stale chips when it hit. A metallic clang, sharp and sudden, splitting the air like a gunshot. I froze, the bag crumpling in my hand. The sound hung there for a moment, echoing off the walls like it was trying to find me. My chest tightened, each reverberation slamming harder than the last. It came from the claw machine. Rule 3. Never touch the claw machine after midnight. If the claw moves on its own, leave the area immediately. I turned slowly, my eyes locking onto the machine. The claw was moving, jerking erratically inside the glass case. It slammed against the sides, making the whole cabinet shudder. The toys inside shifted unnaturally, like something was crawling beneath them, trying to force its way out. I backed away, keeping my eyes on the claw as it screeched louder, its movements becoming more violent. The glass started to fog up, faint claw marks etching themselves across the surface from the inside. My throat tightened, and I felt a bead of sweat slide down my temple, my fingers twitching with the urge to run. Leave the area, I muttered under my breath, barely hearing my own words over the mechanical shrieks of the claw machine. I darted through the arcade, the dim glow of dead screens and flickering bulbs casting jittery shadows on the walls. The claw machine's shrieks faded behind me, but the weight didn't. It clung tight, crawling under my skin like icy fingertips dragging across my spine. That feeling, someone, something, watching, grew heavier with every step. At 1:10 a.m., the silence broke. A low, drawn-out creak from the bathroom door. I didn't see it move, but the sound was deliberate, calculated, like it wanted me to hear. My heartbeat spiked, hammering in sync with the rules etched into my mind. If the bathroom door opens on its own, lock it. Don't look inside. Don't wait for it to close. The key was under the counter. My fingers shook as I grabbed it, the slickness of sweat making it harder to hold. The bathroom loomed at the far end of the arcade, past the dim line of fighting games. As I moved closer, a new sound slithered into the quiet. A wet, dragging slap. Each impact sending sharp ripples through my head, crawling into my skull like an unwanted guest. I stopped short, the door hanging ajar just ahead. It swayed, gentle and unhurried. For a breath, I saw something inside, in the mirror. A figure, impossibly tall and thin, its glowing eyes cutting straight through the dark to find me. It didn't lunge, didn't charge. It just swayed, patient, waiting for me to slip. The key fumbled in my grip as I shoved it into the lock, breath ragged. The click of the latch should have brought relief, but it didn't. I stumbled back, my ears catching the wet slapping for another second before it cut out, leaving behind a silence that felt too loud. The air pressed down, thicker now, humming with something wrong, something that didn't belong. I edged backward, each step deliberate, refusing to turn my back on the door. The room felt colder with every inch I gained, the kind of cold that seeped into your bones and refused to leave. Even from across the arcade, the weight of it pressed down, a suffocating presence that pulled the air from my lungs and raised the hairs on my neck. At 2:10 a.m., the quiet shattered again. A sound, laughter, soft at first, drifting through the arcade like a whisper. It wasn't right. Too high-pitched, too carefree, the kind of laughter that didn't belong in the dead air of a dark, empty room. It grew louder, sharper, each note stabbing into my spine. My hands balled into fists, nails digging into my palms as the sound twisted my nerves. The rule burned in my mind. If you hear a child laughing, find the nearest neon light. Stand beneath it. Don't move until it stops. My legs jerked into motion, carrying me toward the row of racing games. A flickering neon sign buzzed weakly above the cabinets, its glow sputtering like it was just as scared as I was. I stopped under it, chest heaving, and waited. The laughter swelled, echoing through the arcade, bouncing between machines, impossible to pin down. The light overhead crackled violently, throwing jagged shadows across the room. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw them, shapes, dark and twitching, darting between the rows of machines. Their movements were wrong, jerky, like broken marionettes tugged by unseen strings. One of them moved closer, surging out from the darkness. My breath hitched, but the neon above flared to life, bathing me in a harsh, buzzing light. The thing recoiled with a screech, an inhuman wail that made my skull ache. At 2:18 a.m., one of the racing game screens glitched. Static filled the screen, flickering like a dying flame. I tried to ignore it, but as I moved, the static cleared, revealing a dark figure standing unnaturally still within the game. It was humanoid but featureless, its long limbs and glowing white eyes fixed on me, as if it could see straight through the screen and into my soul. Rule 2. If a game screen glitches and shows a figure standing still, avoid walking past it. Find another route. I hesitated, my mind racing. The figure didn't move, but its presence was suffocating. I could feel it watching me, waiting. Against my better judgment, I stepped forward, breaking Rule 2. My foot had barely touched the ground when the screen burst into sparks, and the figure stepped out into the real world. It was taller than I expected, its movements jerky and inhuman. It didn't make a sound as it advanced toward me, its glowing eyes locked onto mine. My breath caught in my throat, fear coursing through my veins as I turned and ran. Running through the arcade was like navigating a maze of nightmares. Machines blinked and sputtered around me, their screens displaying images that didn't make sense. Faces, landscapes, symbols I couldn't recognize, all warped and wrong. The creature pursued me silently. Its long limbs moved like a marionette with broken strings, and yet it was fast, faster than it should have been. I could hear the faint rustle of its movements, like paper dragging across concrete, growing louder with every step. Rule 6. At 2:22 a.m., hide. Wherever you are, stay silent and out of sight until the clock strikes 2:23. I dove under the counter, curling myself into the tightest ball possible. My heart hammered against my ribs as I tried to quiet my breathing. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, each second dragging on like an eternity. I could barely see anything from my hiding place, but I didn't need to see to know that the thing was still out there. The jukebox powered on with a distorted crackle, playing an upbeat tune that I vaguely recognized. It was wrong though, warped, like it was being played backward through broken speakers. The creature seemed to notice. Its scraping grew faster, angrier, like it was searching for something. For me. The sound grew louder, the music climbing to a deafening crescendo. My hands pressed against my ears as I fought the urge to scream. Suddenly, the music stopped. The thing wasn't moving anymore. I waited, my body trembling as the machines around me hummed softly. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the creature was gone, leaving the air eerily quiet. I crawled out from under the counter, my limbs stiff and my mind racing. The rules had kept me alive so far, but something about the jukebox bothered me. Why had it turned on during Rule 6? The manager had said I didn't need to understand the rules, just follow them. But now I had questions that might get me killed. The arcade fell silent again, and for a moment I thought it was over. Then I noticed the claw machine. It was glowing, its light bright and pulsating like a heartbeat. The glass had cracked further, and the toys inside seemed to shift, pressing against the sides as though trying to escape. Their eyes staring out at me, pleading. I backed away, my mind screaming at me to leave, but my feet wouldn't move. The creature was still out there, and I had a sinking feeling the claw machine was my only chance. The air grew heavy, and a low, guttural growl filled the room. The figure emerged from the shadows, its glowing eyes fixed on me. It moved faster this time, its long limbs reaching out as it closed the distance between us. I sprinted toward the claw machine, lungs burning, my breath tearing out in short, desperate gasps. The glass cabinet seemed alive, pulsing with an unnatural energy, its light flaring brighter with every step I took. Behind me, the creature was closing in. I could feel the air shift with each swipe of its claws, the razor-sharp edges slicing through the space just shy of my back. At the last second, I grabbed a stool, its weight uneven in my trembling hands, and swung with everything I had. The glass shattered on impact, shards raining down as the toys inside exploded into a chaotic storm of movement. The machine howled to life, its claw jerking and twitching like a predator let loose. Then it grabbed hold. The creature twisted violently, limbs flailing as it struggled against the machine's pull. Its movements were frantic, desperate, but the claw held fast, dragging it toward the vortex of blinding light at the center. I couldn't move, couldn't look away as the thing's shapeless face contorted into something almost human, its scream piercing the air, tearing through me like a blade. It wasn't done. Just before the claw could claim it, the creature lunged, its claws slashing across my arm. The pain hit instantly. A raw, searing fire that shot through my veins like liquid steel. I collapsed, clutching my arm, the world blurring as the thing was sucked into the machine, its scream fading into the roar of grinding metal. And then, silence. When I finally stumbled out of the arcade, the first rays of dawn were breaking over the horizon. My arm throbbed with pain, the claw marks deep and black, pulsing faintly under my skin. I made my way home, my mind reeling from everything that had happened. I should have felt relief. I'd survived. I'd followed the rules mostly, and I'd won. But as I looked down at my arm, a sense of dread washed over me. The marks weren't healing. If anything, they were spreading, the dark veins creeping further up my skin. Each day, a reminder of the nightmare I had lived through. Weeks later, the claw marks still hadn't faded. I wore long sleeves to hide them, avoiding questions I couldn't answer. At first, I thought it was just a lingering injury, something that would go away with time. But the symptoms grew stranger, more insidious. Neon lights flickered when I walked past them, their buzzing hum growing louder, almost angry. Mirrors became unsettling, their reflections warped and wrong, as if something else was watching me through the glass. Sometimes I'd catch a glimpse of movement behind me, shadows that didn't belong, figures that shouldn't have been there. And then there were the sounds, faint laughter in the quiet moments, the creak of a bathroom door opening when I was alone, the metallic screech of a claw moving without purpose. One night, I couldn't sleep. The pain in my arm was worse than ever, a burning sensation that radiated through my entire body. I sat in the dark, staring at the marks as they seemed to writhe under my skin, the black veins spreading further, almost reaching my shoulder. The laughter grew louder, echoing in my ears until I couldn't take it anymore. I left my apartment and walked aimlessly through the streets of New Brighton, the city quiet and empty. My steps carried me without thought, my mind clouded by fear and exhaustion. The streetlights flickered as I passed beneath them, their glow erratic and unreliable. When I finally looked up, the building loomed in front of me, its neon sign still faintly glowing, humming like it had been waiting. The Midnight Arcade. I didn't remember deciding to come here. Maybe it had decided for me.